This morning's scripture is from Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out to meet him." Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give me some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came. And those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly, I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." One of my New Testament professors in seminary was Bob Jewett. And before he came to Garrett Evangelical Seminary, he taught at Morningside College in Sioux City, Iowa. And Morningside is a lot like Millsaps. It's a United Methodist college, United Methodist related college. And the student body is drawn, of course, from Methodist in Iowa. If not Methodist, then certainly mostly people with Christian church backgrounds. Some may be from Nebraska, some from Minnesota, some from Missouri maybe. But all of them, people who have been to church and have heard the Bible read and heard someone talk about the Bible a lot. And they had gotten used to, listening carefully and seriously to the Bible and to whoever was going to talk about it. Well, one year, in addition to all these Midwestern church folks, there was a Jewish student in Dr. Jewett's Introduction to New Testament class. And he got to the section on the parables, and he read a parable. And of course, all these good Midwestern church folks just sat seriously listening to this Bible passage they'd probably heard many times before, waiting to hear what Professor Jewett would have to say about it. But the Jewish student laughed. Dr. Jewett thought that was unusual. So he read another parable. And the Jewish student laughed. And he read a third parable. And the Jewish student laughed. And you try to be tolerant. Give people the space to be who they are. defend what they think, but Dr. Jewett asked the student to see him after class. And Dr. Jewett said, I know that this is not your scripture. These are not your scriptures. But it's not really polite. It's disrespectful to laugh at other people's scripture. And the Jewish student said, but Dr. Jewett, those are jokes. If you've grown up in the Jewish tradition as I have, and as Jesus did, you recognize jokes. You recognize the setup. 10 bridesmaids waited for the bridegroom. That's a setup. It's like a priest, a rabbit, a priest, a rabbit, and a minister walked into a bar. And the bartender said to the rabbit, what will you have? And the rabbit said, I don't know. I'm only here because of autocorrect. They're jokes. The 10 bridesmaids were waiting for the bridegroom. That's the setup to a joke. And Dr. Jewett, with his degrees from Morningside and Chicago Theological Seminary and the University of Tübingen in Germany, he'd never heard anybody say they were jokes. He had to learn this from his student. He said, if you know how to listen, they're jokes. If you didn't get used to hearing them solemnly. And this is one of those that we listen to and have listened to kind of solemnly. I once attended a planning meeting. I've attended many planning meetings. But this particular planning meeting, the person in charge of the devotional before we started the planning read this parable. And he took that as, you got to plan. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. That's a good proverb. And for sure, that's true. We're always planning. We're planning how to get home, planning what we're going to eat. I'm planning Thanksgiving. It's going to be a different kind of Thanksgiving than it's been because of the virus. We're planning for the 5th Sunday of November. What are we going to do? Where are we going to meet? Are we going to meet outside again? We got to plan. I'm planning for the week after Christmas. What's our plan for getting there? Can we do it safely? Can we keep my father and stepmother safe when we go? Sarah's always planning how she can keep me safe in this time of virus. We got a plan. But what if that's not what Jesus was saying? We can take it from there. It sounds like something we can extract from it. But if you explain a joke, it's ruined. If I have to explain it. And if you're pulling out from there, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, you maybe didn't get the point. You maybe didn't get the joke. Other times, other folks have looked at this and they've talked about, the oil. You have to have enough oil. If you can't borrow somebody else's oil in some cases, if hard times come, if a test comes, you have to have your own oil to deal with it. Some of you have heard this story already, that Lynette came back from a scan where she'd been lying straight on her back. She came back from that scan and her oxygen level was 70%. And that's bad. 70% is bad. She was gasping. They were doing what they could. And a nurse turned around to me and said, if we can't get her oxygen saturation up, do you want her to go on a ventilator? And it turned out that was a test I'd been studying for. I'd been studying for it for over 35 years. With seminary, with clinical pastoral education, with people in our churches who had been asked that same question, where Lynette and I had talked through it with her as we tried to process what would go on, as I had been a hospital chaplain and seen people on ventilators and seen people who went on ventilators and never came off. I'd been studying for that. I didn't want this test. It was a pop quiz. It wasn't really a pop quiz because we knew what the disease progression was doing, but it wasn't a pop quiz I was planning to take that day. But I knew the answer. I knew she wouldn't want it. I knew I wouldn't want it. So I told them no ventilator. And they did get her back. She got to have her write her own consent to hospice. She got to spend a day at home with us. So the test was passed. But I couldn't borrow that from anybody. There wasn't anybody in that room who knew the answer to the test, if it was my answer, if it was her answer. I had to prepare. I couldn't borrow anybody else's oil. Some people had looked at this and said, you know, they called them the wise bridesmaids or the wise virgins, but you know, they could have shared. The light from 5 well-lit lamps would have carried them all into the party of the bridegroom. They could have shared, and you talk about, you use that as an opportunity to talk about sharing. We have to teach our children about sharing. We have one child, and she or he is the center of the universe, and they like that. And as the pediatrician told us when we got ready to take Sarah home, he said, you know, it would be like if you went home and you said, now, honey, I've got a new wife, and she's going to live here with us. And of course, I still love you. I love you as much as I ever did. But she's going to live here too. Well, you wouldn't like that. I wouldn't like it. And that's what bringing that second baby home is like. To the first baby, to the first child. Sometimes they never get over it. My brother's been mad at me about that for 61 years. So you share. Well, sharing is good. I don't think that was what they were talking about. This is a final exam that the disciples are getting ready to take. They don't know it's the final exam. Jesus knows it's the final exam. He already knows what he has come into Jerusalem riding a donkey. The people have waved palm branches, a sign of Jewish nationalism. They've said Hosanna, which means save us now. Save us from the Romans is what they mean. He's gotten the attention of the Romans. The Romans didn't know about him before. Now they know. And they don't give much room to threats to their power. They sure don't give much room to people who make fun of them by riding a donkey in a procession. So he's got the attention of the Romans. He has gone into the temple and has attacked the economic basis of the temple. He has turned over the tables of the money changers, driven out the sacrificial animals. He has directly challenged the power and the economic base of the chief priests. Now they maybe didn't know about him before, but now they do. And he's their enemy. He has taught in public for a few days. And in his teaching, he has challenged the Pharisees. The Pharisees and the priests didn't necessarily get along. But on the theory that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, they have lied against Jesus. The final exam is coming. And he's trying to get his disciples ready for the final exam. He knows what's coming. They may not. And he's told them several times what's going to happen. And every time he tells them, they say, no, that's not going to happen. No, that couldn't possibly happen. So he has to figure out some way to get around their defenses. And so he tells them a joke about these wise and foolish bridesmaids. They'd probably heard about wise and foolish bridesmaids before. And sometimes jokes aren't just silly. Many times they're not just silly. Many times they are ways of talking about those uncomfortable things that we can't talk about directly, or when we talk about them directly, we get so anxious we can't hear it. And sometimes a joke can tell that deeper truth that gets around our defenses. In the former Soviet Union, they had jokes. We will continue to work. We will continue to pretend to work as long as they continue to pretend to pay us. It's a way of coping with a hard situation. It's an old joke because it involves Leonid Brezhnev. Leonid Brezhnev takes his mother down to see his dacha, his villa, his vacation home on the Black Sea. And she sees it. It's big. It's well decorated. It's luxuriously appointed. She's very impressed. But she says, but Leonid, what if the Reds come back? She says that to the General Secretary of the Communist Party. What if the Reds come back? A way of acknowledging there's a new aristocracy, even though they say they're communists. It gets around the defenses and tells a deeper truth. Jesus is trying to get around the defenses of his disciples so that they can hear the truth they need to hear before the final exam. The final exam is soon. And he's trying to get them ready for it, because by getting around them with that kind of joke, God can be let in.